I know that Isaac Asimov is like just this big legend. Everybody's like, oh, I love Isaac Asimov. He's one of the kings of science fiction. Almost all of his stories are just a bunch of eggheads sitting around in a room having a conversation, discussing some topic until one of them figures out the solution to whatever the heck it is they're discussing.
Do you feel continually let down by modern media? Do you miss the good old days, back when all that mattered was a good story and not some agenda? Do you have ambitions of picking up a pen and pad and fighting the creative war yourself? Then this is the podcast for you. Each week, I'm going to talk to a creator who said enough is enough and started making the content they wished was out there. Join us as we discuss the ups and downs of the self-publishing world. We want to help empower you to join the Iron Age of media. Welcome to Iron Age Marketing. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Iron Age Marketing. I'm Nikki P, here as always. Today's guest is Cirsova with the Mighty Sons of Hercules. How are we doing today, boss?
Hey, doing all right. Good to be here.
We're glad to have you. I am always excited to kind of meet people in the, self-publishing in the, I don't know, we call it the Iron Age space, but just to me, it's the new self-publishing movement. It's the idea of people just saying, corporate's not the way to do it, and I'll just do it myself. I think that'll work better. And I think for most people, it does work better. If for no other reason, I think it works better for consumers like myself, people that are, appreciators of art. In our talk leading up to the episode, I asked you how much, are you a writer yourself, or are you a, professional appreciator? And I think at the core, we all at least wish we were a writer. Wish we were doing more of it. But your angle with the Mighty Sons of Hercules is more on the professional appreciator and kind of distribution side of things. Does that sound correct?
Yeah, that pretty much nails it. I'm the editor for the collection. It's going to be 8 stories featuring original heroes inspired by the peplum genre of sword and sandal stuff. And we approached several of our best authors from Cirsova magazine who we thought would be a good fit for this project. So we got the stories on spec, said, hey, do you want to be part of this collection? If we fund it on Kickstarter, we'll cut you checks for your stories. And if everything goes according to plan, we'll have this really awesome anthology come out. And so these guys said, sure, yeah, we're in. Sent in some really great stories, and now we're trying to meet our end of the bargain by raising the funds to cut checks to them.
Okay, how many issues have you actually put out so far, or how deep into this are you?
Well, as far as Cirsova magazine goes, I think we're about to drop either our 28th or 29th issue. We've been doing it since 2016, more or less quarterly. Yeah. And so that's kind of been our bread and butter, but we've also done several little projects on the side, just little fun things, either with specific authors or with multiple authors. And this is one of the things that we're kind of trying to squeeze in on the side. Like, we've got the next issue of the magazine coming out in September, regardless of what happens. But if you just can't get enough of these particular authors and this kind of fiction, then we've got this really cool and exciting thing that you can also check out, which in this case is Mighty Sons of Hercules.
So you already have learned the most important lesson of sales is sell to the people that already buy your stuff. Just give them more stuff to buy.
Yeah. That's one of the big things that I think a lot of people maybe take for granted is having all the options, all the titles out there. That's what sort of ends up generating that revenue for you. And I understand that it's a lot harder for single authors who are trying to make money in this sphere because, you might be able to put out 2, 3 books a year. Most people are probably going to realistically put out 1 book a year. I have some friends who are able to put out like 5, 6, even 7 books a year, but those guys are on a whole other level. But we've been doing it for about 8 years now, and across all of our releases, we're finally up to about 60 titles that are available on Amazon, and we're just now reaching that kind of critical threshold of sustainability where we're getting that regular monthly revenue to help pay for and fund our projects. So it takes persistence, perseverance, and it takes time.
Well, I think that a lot of people, celebrity is worth something, even if it's just like small celebrity in like a certain sphere.
Oh
And
yeah,
that's not
absolutely.
something you're just gonna acquire overnight. Like, and it's one of my things. I call myself a post corporate marketer, and the idea being that, I mean, God, look at the world around us. Look at how much like big companies have burned up their whatever goodwill existed for them in the past couple of years, because we've been shown that not a single one of them can we trust. And so I think most people go out there kind of at best half trusting people. And so building trust and building a place where people are willing to spend money on you, that's a time consuming endeavor.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So I'm curious, how did you find your way to this space and say I'm going to put out a magazine and focus on this particular type of art?
Yeah, it actually goes back to the mid teens with the sad puppies and the OSR movement. You know, um, Cirsova actually started out as a Dungeons and Dragons blog that originally was focused on a setting, but then moved more towards mechanics. But one of our friends, Jeffro Johnson, was at the time doing a deep dive on Appendix N, which is the list at the back of the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Master Guide of the specific authors and works of fiction that inspired the game. And so he's doing a deep dive on this. I'm following kind of what he's doing. And I also end up finding this cache of pulp magazines at a flea market, and I know what names I need to be looking out for now. And so I start getting into that and checking those out and just looking at all this old pulp fiction, just being blown away by it. It's so different from even the fantasy stuff I kind of grew up reading, because I kind of grew up on like the Dragonlance era and Shannara stuff. And yeah, and, you know, I got to thinking, well, surely there's people out there who's still writing stuff like this today, but do they have any places to publish it? And that the thing that you always kept hearing was like the magazines these days are all just publishing garbage, experimental fiction and just weird, random, boring, thinky stories and social issues stories. And so my thought was, if I created a magazine and an outlet for authors who wrote the kind of fiction that I liked, and also I paid good money for it, then I would be able to encourage it and have it all in one place, easy for me to read.
It's always selfishness, for the record.
Yeah.
Like, I started this because I wanted more of the stuff I want to read.
Exactly.
If I could help them afford to write the stuff, then I get more stuff.
Yeah. So in late 2015, I put out a submission call, managed to get enough fiction to put out one issue of a magazine, and I did a little mini Kickstarter for it. It didn't come anywhere close to paying out what I was paying to get it done, but we came out with our first issue. People were pretty impressed by it, and we put out another submission call, and we ended up getting something like 5 or 6 times as many stories this time, and enough to actually fill up 3 issues worth of content. And right there, bam, we had a quarterly magazine for 2016. And we've, with a few exceptions, 2017 we did 2 issues just to like get a little break and figure some things out. We did 3 issues in 2019 and 5 issues in 2020. But other than that, every year we've been quarterly.
Nice. Now, I'm curious, do you come from a background in which naturally publishing is a thing that you do and it was just a natural transfer of skills, or you, like a lot of other people, not at all, just, hey, I'm going to jump into this industry I know very little about because I like the stuff that it puts out?
Well, it's one of those weird cases where I kind of I'm self-taught, but it still runs in the family. My grandfather was an editor for Legal Review and other things like back when he was in his career, and but it just sort of happened at a time when there were a lot of tools available. It was really easy to start doing serious self indie publishing stuff. Now, before I launched the magazine, I actually did do a dry run on a choose your own adventure novel that I wrote just to, figure out how to get something formatted and how to use one of the print on demand services like Lulu or something. And, that turned out really nice, I thought. And I'm like, okay, I know how to do this. I know how to use InDesign to make covers. I know how to get everything formatted. And I know how to get the submissions out there. And it just kind of took off from there. I mean, I've still been kind of learning as I go, and I've had some ups and downs working with different printers and distributors over the years.
Well, and I think that story goes for everybody out there because
Yeah.
they're always changing up how they do things to try and be better or cheaper at what they do based on the market.
Yeah, like when we first got started, we were using CreateSpace for printing the magazine, and we were able to fulfill Kickstarters using CreateSpace because um, you could print up saleable copies before it went live. Now the way that Amazon KDP works after they bought CreateSpace, you cannot print a saleable copy of a book without it already being available for sale on Amazon.com. And so you can't really do a Kickstarter like that because you don't want the people who pre-ordered your book through Kickstarter to be getting them later than the people who just go on to Amazon day one and buy it. So we've had to figure out some workarounds with that, and we use much more expensive printers to make sure people get their books on time for the Kickstarters. But we these days we just dump the magazine onto Amazon. People can buy it as soon as it's out. We don't even run Kickstarters for it anymore.
Okay, well, that's interesting. Um, why don't you tell us a little bit about like specifically what we're looking at in the next issue? Like you said you've been putting this out since 2016. How have things changed? Have you like drilled in deeper on like what your core offering is? Has that changed? Or
Yeah, we actually did a rebrand and relaunch with an all new number one back in 2019 because, our first few years we were called Cirsova Magazine of Heroic Fantasy and Science Fiction. And one of the reasons why we changed it was we just got so many submissions that were just, Dungeons and Dragons kind of fan fiction stuff, not really pulpy stuff in the veins of what we were looking for. And also, by sheer miracle, we ended up with a lost Edgar Rice Burroughs Tarzan story that fell in our laps. And this is neither a science fiction story nor a fantasy story, but it is an adventure story. So what better a time to rebrand as a magazine of thrilling adventure and daring suspense? So, the kinds of stories that we look for and publish haven't really changed since we first started the magazine. But one of the things that we've found is, focusing on the action, the adventure, and the romance lets us reach a wider audience. I think we don't fall into that same fantasy and science fiction ghetto since we try to frame ourselves as a bit more diverse in our offerings.
Adventure is a very interesting word. It's funny because like my band Puma Thurman, we refer to ourselves as an adventure rock band, in part because we don't really neatly fit into any genre. We're not a metal band. We're not, I don't know, a rock band or a punk band. We're just write weird songs generally about movie characters.
Yeah,
So
yeah, and adventure stories are stories where things happen. That's one of the things that we always look for is stories where things happen and actions have consequences that matter. There are so many stories out there that are just, people sitting around talking. Like I know that Isaac Asimov is like just this big legend. Everybody's like, "Oh, I love Isaac Asimov. He's one of the kings of science fiction." Almost all of his stories are just a bunch of eggheads sitting around in a room having a conversation, discussing some topic until one of them figures out the solution to whatever the heck it is they're discussing. That's the story. That's all it is.
well, and I'm a big Asimov fan, and the reason I'm a fan is because I do like the very cerebral storytelling where the whole point in science fiction is to take an idea and like really tear apart the idea, in my opinion. So I like that good hard sci-fi, but there's that's not adventure stories.
Yeah, I think you can do that though, but with more stuff happening. I mean, my issue with Asimov is, I mean, he's a brilliant scientist, but he just cannot tell a story to save his life. At least that's just how I feel. So, like, I love his nonfiction stuff. His nonfiction, it has some of the best, easy to understand and digest scientific explanations for whatever topic it is he's writing on. But just when it comes to his fiction stuff, I'm like, I can't do it. Which is one of the reasons why we had that big science fiction, that Asimov science fiction giveaway last week, because I inherited my dad's fairly sizable science fiction collection, and he had a whole lot of Asimov, and I don't have anywhere to put all of it, so I'm like, I'm probably never going to get to these. I'll give them to people who want them.
Well, and it's funny. It's like I do love Asimov, but honestly, like when it comes down to like the reading of fiction, I do like probably more activity going on. I like a story. That's why I like the he said Edgar Rice Burroughs. That stuff's so good.
Yeah, if I don't know if you've read much Raymond F. Jones, but he's the sort of guy who could write basically a quality assurance story that he could sell to Campbell's for astounding, and then go around and write a ray gun romance that he could sell to Planet Stories. So if you like the stuff that Asimov is able to do with his fiction, but like more action and adventure to it, Raymond F. Jones is a name that you definitely should check out, and Ross Rocklin as well. Like before the meme of the big three of Heinlein, Hubbard, and Asimov, Ross Rocklin was considered one of the kings of science fiction.
So I'd be remiss if I didn't ask this. I'm gonna give you like probably the hard question, which is you've been publishing this magazine. You've had lots of submissions. You've put out, I'm sure, a ton of different people's work. Now you got to pick a favorite. I mean, what are the names that you just are super excited to have been able to kind of feature in your magazine and be a part of kind of their.
Oh man, it's really hard to choose, but I think one of the coolest things is that starting in our second issue, we started publishing all new Dreamlord stories from Adrian Cole. I don't know if you're familiar with Adrian Cole, but he got his start writing Sword and Planet stuff in the early 70s. His first books were the Dreamlord trilogies published through Zebra Books. And I got to talking to him about it, and because he had a mutual friend with the guy who was working on a website with us, and we just got to talking. And I asked, "Would you be interested in writing some new Dreamlord stories?" And he was like, "Yeah, sure, absolutely." And so he's been writing new stories set in the future of this original trilogy that he wrote in the 70s for us. And now we actually secured the rights to reprint an omnibus collection of the original trilogy from the 70s and a companion volume of the new stories that he's been writing for the Dream Lord since 2016.
Oh, that's super cool.
So like that's really cool to me. That's about as cool as us publishing a lost Edgar Rice Burroughs story.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I mean, that's like really inserting yourself into like the story and the history of like this type of fiction, frankly. And who doesn't want to cement themselves in, you know, in the history of something?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, we've been doing a lot of exciting stuff over the years and had a chance to work with a lot of authors. And if anybody has been following us, they'll see a lot of names of people who have been there just about every year, if not every year. Like I think we've probably had at least one Misha Burnett story in every year. We recently started serializing Michael Tierney's Wild Stars novels. That he's been working on those for nearly 4 decades now, and so it's been really cool working on those too.
Oh, that's so cool. So, kind of moving along, what are, for me, while I love the stories and the creation and all that, it's super important to me because so few people focus on it so much, is to talk about like how do we get these ideas out to more people? How do we turn eyes towards us? Obviously, you've managed to grow and do this since 2016. So clearly you have some experience with building and growing an audience. What are, I guess, we'll start with the things that you think are most important to that end, the things that have really helped you do that?
You know, I think one of the places where we have an advantage is that we're a magazine and we have multiple authors in each issue, you know? So that's always going to be an attention multiplier. It's not just one person trying to get their stuff in front of the world. It's everybody who's involved trying to get that one thing out there. So, you know, instead of having one person say, "Hey, you need to check this thing out," you've got 10 people saying, "Hey, you need to check this one thing out." And you have that just built into it by its very nature as an anthology. And I think that cannot be underestimated or understated in its importance. And I think that's one of the reasons why you're starting to see these magazines and anthologies making a comeback.
Well, I can tell you from like a consumer end of things, I can't wait to go and pick up a copy of the magazine just because I want to. It's like I'm going to get a bunch of news stories from a bunch of authors I don't know anything about, and you know maybe I'll pick up a new favorite artist today, someone that I'm like really excited about their writing style, and it's a little easier to say bite down on a price point when I know I'm going to be having a broader experience than, say, maybe locking myself into a single story that I may or may not like. I don't really know.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we've tried to do is keep our price point relatively low over the years. We've had to go up a little bit just so that we can keep our discounts for our contributors at a reasonable rate. But you know, $14 or $14.99, you're getting about 70,000 words of fiction, which, you know, if you put it into a regular sized book, it would be a 200 to 250 page book. So even though the magazine's like 150 pages, I know nobody thinks in terms of word count unless they're an editor or an author. So everybody's like, "So how many pages is it?" It's like, "Well, it's this way, this the other way."
Well, and is it a magazine print? What size font is?
Yeah, and that's one of the things we actually did early on was we kind of settled on a larger sized font. Originally, it was so that we could pad out enough pages that Amazon would give us a spine when we printed them. But we had a lot of people say, we really appreciate that your magazine is easy to read because it's got the double columns, it's got the nice, easy, legible font. So we just kind of stuck it out with the size 14 font that we found, and have gone with that ever since.
Okay. Now, obviously, with a quarterly magazine, you know, you're going to have cycles and you're going to have that built-in necessity of keeping at least a fairly regular contact with the people that are interested in your product. But I'm curious, like, how do you effectively communicate between release cycles and kind of keep people pumped for the next release in between times?
Well, we've got our website, which is essentially just a WordPress blog, but it works for all the basic stuff and news that we have to get out there and keep posted. Uh, we have a mailing list that people can sign up for, and we will occasionally send out news about new releases and new crowd funds. And we're also on Twitter, so we try to stay engaged with people who are interested in what we're doing.
When you're engaging kind of in that between time, what are the things that you utilize? I guess is for stories. I come from like the email marketing world. That's how I found my way into all this the marketing stuff. And so like I have email lists that I get stuff from literally every day. And if I don't get an email from one of the email marketers, I'm like, they missed a day. What's up? Are they dead? Obviously, you don't send out emails that often, but I'm curious, like how much contact do you feel is like useful? What kind of things do you think or do you look for as far as reasons to send contact or things to recycle as content?
Like I said, most of the stuff that we do is if we have a new release coming out, we'll send out an email about it. If we have a crowd fund that we're doing, we'll send a release about that. But most of the time, we just kind of stick to posting content on the blog. It doesn't necessarily even have to be related to the magazine or publishing or what we're doing, because we didn't start out as a publishing blog. We started out as a gaming blog, and so like I try to still do some gaming content every once in a while when I have time for it. I try to post reviews of other books that I read or get. Um, and I Twitter, just shit post and be interesting and hope that people want to check us out.
Yeah, for real. Um, Now, so I'm curious. You as you said a couple of times, you started out as a gaming blog, and then you kind of take this turn or pivot or whatever we call in the marketing world. I'm curious how that has worked out for you as your audience kind of gone along for the ride with that. Was there like a natural crossover that it just works out fine if they're not terribly interested?
It's kind of interesting because what ended up happening was you ended up with this split in the OSR community of people interested in Dungeons and Dragons game blogs and stuff. You had those of us who kind of moved more towards fiction and publishing and that sort of stuff, and those who just kind of stuck around trying to write their own little fantasy heartbreaker games and module contents and knockoffs of BX Dungeons and Dragons. And so what kind of happened was a lot of the people in the OSR weren't that interested in what we were doing. They weren't that interested in what Jeffro was doing with his Appendix N stuff. And we took that to a different audience. We took that to the audience of people who were interested in fantasy and science fiction. And there was just this huge wave of energy and excitement and just a lot of things that were going on during 2016 and into early 2017. And I don't know how much you've seen anybody talk about the pulp revolution or the pulp rev, but there was all this energy, and Daddy Warpig is the one who said there's a pulp revolution going on. He was the one who kind of coined that term. Like the stuff that I was doing, the stuff that Jeffro was doing, the stuff that was going on at the Castalia House blog, the the various authors and writers who were starting their own blogs talking about this kind of content. And you had some of the stuff coming off from the Sad Puppies, because when Sad Puppies 3, after that had happened, the people at the Mad Genius Club didn't really want people going off brand, even though there was still that energy and excitement. So they kind of redirected it towards the new pulp stuff.
Well, and that's the one thing I've been excited about with the Iron Age, and I'm will continue to preach that I don't think of Iron Age as being a political thing. Mostly because I've watched the Comicsgate thing, where I don't want to say it cannibalizes itself, but it's so insular. Like you're either Comicsgate or you're not Comicsgate, and I'm like, I kind of don't need a new club to be in, guys. I want a movement that's going to help people pursue their dreams. And from my perspective, I think corporate publishing is a bad idea for everyone. I don't care if you're a right winger or a left winger, because no matter what, even if you have strong left wing ideas and you put them in that world, you're not going to get your strong left wing ideas out there unwatered down. And if you're a right winger, you don't even get the chance to have your ideas watered down. So, I mean, that industry works for nobody as far as a creation standpoint goes. Your art is always just going to be kind of shit out the other end. So I think, focusing on self-publishing for everyone, go create whatever you want to create. And if the audience is out there, by all means, let them read whatever they want to read. I don't care if I don't like it or if it's crap to me, but you deserve the same ability to create your stuff as anyone else does and find that audience. You don't need gatekeepers and people kind of keeping us in the way of that. So for me, that's one of the things I like about the Iron Age movement. Is just most of the people that are in there, like, look, do your thing, man. Go create your creation and find your audience. That's all you got to do. As opposed to, like, say, with a Comicsgate thing, where it tends to be more of a club and you're either in it or you're out of it. And some of those blow-ups that happen, like, oh, well, so-and-so doesn't talk to anyone else, so they got kicked out of Comicsgate. And you're like, okay.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we kind of did early on with the pulp revolution is, we were like, okay, there are two different things. There's the phenomenon that's going on that people are describing, and then there are the people who are, in this group or adjacent, and let's try to keep those things distinct and separate from one another. And, I think it really worked, to where we can talk about the pulp revolution as this thing that happened and this phenomenon at that point in time, and you have the pulp rev, who are some of the authors and editors and stuff, who still hang out and have the discussions and help with marketing and do that stuff. And being part of one does not necessarily mean you have to be part of the other. And so one of the things that we tried to make really clear early on was that just because what we were doing was being described as the pulp revolution, like, we were not the Pope of the pulp revolution. We were not out there to grant people bona fides. And, if you were published by us, that didn't mean that you were part of a movement. And if you were part of a movement, it didn't make you more or less likely to be published by us. We just were going to stick to what we did and continue publishing good fiction.
Well, and it sounds like you're doing that, because I'm frankly very excited to go and pick up a copy of the most recent and looking forward to the next one. So in that vein, where can we send people to check out what you're working on?
Well, of course, there's the Mighty Sons of Hercules Kickstarter, which is going on right now, that you can go on, pledge either for a soft cover book, a hardcover book, or if you want to, you can even pledge to take out an advertisement in the back of the book. One of the things that you used to see a lot in the old paperbacks were either advertisements, that you could tear out of the back page, or some of them even had like hard cardstock inserts. Well, if you have an Iron Age product or a not Iron Age product or service that you're interested in advertising in the Mighty Sons of Hercules, you can back at one of the patron tiers and shoot us the image, and we'll drop it into layout before we go to print. The other big things that we have going on right now is, of course, the summer issue just dropped last month. We've already sold like nearly 150 copies of that since it dropped on the 15th. And we've got the fall issue coming up September 15th. So, we just keep on rolling.
Right on. In there, I'm trying to. Do we get a good URL we can send people to?
Yeah. Cirsova.wordpress.com is our website. You can find pretty much anything about the magazine, any of our publications there. Or if, you just want to go to Amazon and buy something, you just type in Cirsova and you'll find our stuff. It's not hard.
Okay, good. Look, we're talking about people that read for a living. I want to make it as easy on them as possible to get to the website.
Oh yeah,
I don't want them to lose interest, Well, thank you so much for coming on today. And as I tell everyone, hopefully there's something in there that you can learn, take to your next creative project, and help make it a success. So, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Do you fancy yourself the next Tolkien, Lewis, or Barker? Maybe you just have something subversive to say. Hopefully this podcast is helping you. But maybe your ambitions are just a little bigger than you can handle on your own. Head over to ironagemarketing.com and let Nikki P help ensure your book doesn't release to nobody.